Okay, we're going to jump in. Welcome, Zach. I think there's a little bit about you that we need to know. So let's start with Zach. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about who you are and if any of the things that I talked about in terms of you walking to a bar were accurate.
Yeah, I'm a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon. I've kind of diverse interests, so and I've wandered a bit over time, I guess. But right now, I am a professor of machine learning and operations research. And apparently, I need to shut my browser window so they stop making noise.
There's some activity going on in there.
Yeah, I'm a very popular guy, you can tell.
So we're lucky to have you.
Yeah, all right, we'll see. All right, hopefully. This is like a problem always, like my phone is set up so that if I don't pick up my phone, my browser starts ringing or my Gmail starts ringing, but I always have like 7 Gmails open at the same time and I can't hunt them down. So hopefully that won't happen to us.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a professor of operations research and machine learning at CMU. So I'm affiliated across departments, and I run a lab that we call the approximately correct machine intelligence lab. This is a play both off of probably approximately correct learning, which is like a framework for, underlying most like the theory of machine learning. But it's also sort of a play off the way machine learning is applied in the world is usually sort of, only an approximate solution or solving sort of a surrogate problem for what you really care about. And so we work on problems including our key application focus is problems in clinical healthcare. On a more theoretical or methodological side, we work on sort of what are the foundational principles for building systems that'll actually be robust in the real world. So people are really excited about AI, thinking they're going to use it in all kinds of environments and to drive all kinds of decisions. But when you look at what they're actually developing, it's technology that does one thing really well, which is prediction, and usually prediction under the assumption that what you've seen in the past is perfectly representative of what you'll see in the future. So we try to sort of go beyond that formulation to build technology that's maybe more robust in the real world. So that's kind of my like kind of professional background. In the context of Delphi, though, basically when COVID hit, a lot of us who had sort of related or adjacent interests or skill sets sort of looked to see how we could help out. And so professors Roni Rosenfeld and Ryan Tibshirani co-founded this epidemiologic sort of forecasting and tracking group called Delphi that traditionally focused on flu forecasting. And they're actually one of the leaders in this area. So they're like a perennial top finisher in, say, the CDC flu forecasting competitions. They're a CDC Center of Excellence for flu forecasting. So obviously, once we found ourselves in an epidemic requiring tracking and forecasting of virus spread, they were sort of like natural focal points. So I've joined the Delphi team along with a bunch of other people. The team sort of swelled from 8 people to maybe 30 people. And now with the addition of at least, for the next 6 months of some generous support from Google, both financially and in the form of 13 of their really talented employees who sort of joined us to help sort of like turbocharge our operations. We're now like a 40-something person operation.
So that's awesome. But let me ask you, why do you think I asked you that question about what happens when you walk into a bar? Because then I'm going to go pass the baton. I want to talk to Todd for a second.
I'm not 100% sure where your headlines, where your punchline's going, but I guess something about my background sounds like the setup for a joke.
So your background is you were a jazz musician. I guess you still are. Once a jazz musician, always, and you played the saxophone. How did you pivot into what you're doing now? Or are you running it simultaneously?
At some point I made a sacrifice. So I grew up, I think the impulse to pursue music, or at least the intellectual aspect of it, is a lot more like research than it is like what you do in coursework. So I think if you're a kid trapped in the school system, just being horrifically bored, 8 hours a day, like there's something about the pursuit of jazz music, which is very much a sort of like autodidactic pursuit. Like, you might take lessons, someone might point you in some directions, but it's mostly like you have to go decide what information to get from where. And I also grew up at a time, like I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, and Branford Marsalis. I was a saxophone player, and Branford Marsalis lived in the same city as me. And I guess like the thing I was good at was the saxophone. And so I was able to get Branford's attention and get lessons privately, like when I was growing up. And so you know, I think like when you're in that kind of environment, the person who's like kind of like sort of like, you know, something of a god to you at like that age is there. I think that kind of provides a certain kind of sense that you're, you know, like got to meet people like Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter and stuff when I was a teenager. So in terms of switching, I mean, I continued, you know, I got a secular education, so I didn't go to a conservatory. I went to Columbia and I studied math and economics. But I was playing music the whole time, and because I was in Columbia, it's easy because you're in New York, and the music scene tends to operate between 11 at night and 4 in the morning, and school tends to operate between like 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. or something. So it kind of worked out, you know, although maybe I didn't get enough sleep. And it was really in my mid-20s that like I think I was happier with that balance of like sort of creative and scholarly pursuits that I had in college, and I think in my mid-20s something was missing. And I went out and visited a friend. So I was like in New York. I was kind of broke, playing gigs at, you know, for like $50 at like wherever, the Fat Cat or the Moldy Fig. And I was like living in the way you live in New York when you have no money. So it was just like people vomiting on my sidewalk, and I was like in a rent stabilized apartment that was like full of mold, where the landlord's like key objective in life was to get us to leave the building. And I was like, you know, had some kind of whatever ambivalence. And I went out and visited a friend who was doing a PhD actually in music. He's a composer, was doing a PhD at UC Santa Cruz. But like my first exposure, you know, maybe not my first, but I also had some contacts who were like researchers in biology at Columbia. So I had some exposure to the scientific community, but then I went out and visited this friend at UC Santa Cruz, and which is just like heaven on earth, you know, it's just like up on this beautiful hill, and you're in the woods, and you're 1 mile away from the beach. And all the food is organic and delicious, and you know, it's kind of sunny enough year round. And I just kind of like went, and you know, all the 80-year-olds look 30 years old, and everybody's fit. And I just thought like I had a sense of like, this is, you know, and then people are arguing with each other all the time, which as like a New York Jew with like an academic inclination is sort of appealing to me, you know, about the, you know, at least the PhD students were.
Yeah.
So I just kind of went on this trip and was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do a PhD. And that was like the first consideration was to do a PhD. And then the second consideration was PhD in what? And so I had taught myself how to program earlier and had some natural feeling towards computation, but I was like maybe a decade or two behind where I like should be. But I don't know, I think there's something kind of liberating about like when you come up doing something and you're like you expect that you're like excellent at it, like it's the thing you've made your identity. You get kind of paranoid. You look over your shoulder. Like as a musician growing up, you're very aware of like who's your age and what have they accomplished. And actually just like committing a small act of like imposterism and just blitzing into a new field was quite liberating, because the bar was, you know, the expectations for me were so low. It was just like, oh, like when I published my first paper at a second tier conference at CMU, that might've just been like, okay, whatever. But, you know, for me, it was like, you know, it's sort of like people are impressed because it was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, the saxophone player is writing a paper and like 6 months later. So there's something, you know, it's like when you learn a new language, like the bar is lower, but that also frees you up to like, you're not like, I'm not going to try unless I'm the best, because you're not holding yourself to that. You're just kind of having fun with it. So I basically just applied to a bunch of PhDs, and I had some faculty from undergrad that had enough faith in me to like write strong letters, even though I had no research accomplishments whatsoever in life. And I got lucky that when I actually faked my way into a PhD program and got there, I got there at the right place at the right time. You know, it was 2013, right as machine learning was starting to blow up, and it was also a period of change, because in machine learning we were going from a very like super mathematical discipline focused primarily on a system of methods called kernel machines to a very kind of like Wild West where neural networks were taking over, and nobody really knew how to get them to work. And it was new to everybody. And so those periods of transition are really an opportunity for someone entering the field, because, you know, everybody's in some sense, you know, those other skills obviously do come in useful for the people who are already experts at something, but at least in some sense, everybody's starting from scratch. And so I got to enter the field at a moment where everybody was starting from scratch. And there is even a way in which it's an advantage, because like you have no prior commitments. I'm not like I'm attached to this other methodology. It's like, I just got here. I want to do something that's actually going to work. And so being able to see things with fresh eyes at that moment, I think I just got one, lucky that someone took a chance on me and I got into PhD, maybe two, lucky that I got in right at that moment of kind of like a seismic change in the kind of AI world. And then maybe, you know, there was some execution involved in like actually
getting stuff done. Well, let me pause for a second because I want to bring Todd on. So Todd, I mentioned earlier, Todd Underwood, he's the site manager, vice president of engineering, and maniacal treadmill walker, as well as a lot of civic muscle he exerts in our community. So we're thrilled to have him from Google on really quick. But Todd, so let's talk about this project. Let's talk about Google and the engagement here in terms of what Zach was sort of setting the stage for, so that we can dive in a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. One of the things that I think for all of us has been so infuriating and so frustrating about this pandemic is the lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge in the sense that we are just adrift. And it's not unexpected. Those of us who know anything about science, who understand how progress and knowledge works, knows it's been just a heartbeat. We still don't understand who gets it, who gets sick, how is it transmitted. But for those of us as we're living through this, it is maddening to know that like we don't understand, we don't know, we can't predict. And so I think in that context, there's been rightfully a pretty aggressive effort to try to give public policymakers and citizens like us some way of hanging on to, where is this going? Where is this bad? Where is it getting better? What are the factors that contribute to that? This sounds sounds dreary, like, we're going to give public policymakers some dashboards, but it's also for us as humans, as citizens, as parents, like, should the schools open? Like, should we all wear masks? Are bars safe? Can I get takeout or not? Like, do I need to like spray myself down with Clorox if I touch the UPS box? Like, these are quite, I mean, like, you all have lived through this as well as I have. And we've all gone through these phases of like, I'm terrified to touch things. Wait, the Atlantic says touching things isn't that bad. Like, I wasn't worried about the air. Now I'm terrified about the air. Like, planes are dangerous. Planes are safe. Planes are dangerous. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think in that context, I have a lot of gratitude for the people who are spending some time trying to figure things out. And among the most exciting aspects of that are the projects that are trying to figure where things are going. And so, earlier in the year, Google AI did some effort to try to make some predictions and try to make some forecasts. There's a lot of data. There's not a lot of information, right? There's a lot of data. You can get test rates. You can get positive test rates. You can get PCR cycle thresholds in some cases. You can get hospitalizations, intubations, deaths. You can get excess deaths. But putting all of that together in a way that is meaningful in any way is pretty scarce out there. And I know, like, I am not the only nerd on this call who's built his own spreadsheet, scraping data from places and putting it together the way I want, because I'm not satisfied that the county won't report positivity or that you can't get. So I think we're really excited about this project. This team is a storied team. This team is it's not a team that's starting from scratch. It's like, oh, maybe we should predict a thing. This is a team that's been analyzing data, understanding the way that data indicates progress of illness, and surfacing information about that for some time. They're respected. They know what they're doing. And this is an extension of existing super promising work. And we're really happy to support it. And I have to say, for our employees here in Pittsburgh and around the country, actually, I think there's one who might be outside of the US as well. Like, we had a ton of applications from some amazing engineers because they're frustrated too. Like, you're sitting there, like, it's great. You got a job. That's good. You're getting paid. That's good. You're not at risk. Maybe your family's okay, but you're desperate to do anything to contribute to the response that society is having to this pandemic. And so we had a ton. It was very difficult, my understanding, to select. And I think Zach got some of the cream of the crop of Google program managers, product managers, and software engineers. So I'm really excited to see this happen.
And so are people coming out of your team as well, locally?
Yeah, my personal team, I lost. Two people have thoughtfully contributed to this, and their motivation, three. And their motivation is exactly what I said, is they're happy with their jobs. They love working for Google. They like the challenges they have. They're desperate to actually contribute to the most important thing that's happening to most of us right now. And so this is a phenomenal way for somebody who's a program manager or a software engineer or a data nerd to like actually get to do something that probably matters quite a lot.
That's really, and so is some of this information available now? I mean, is there a way now for us to see some of this? Because you can see people are asking questions. They want to know about rolling averages, et cetera. I mean, you're really whetting our appetites because you articulated it very well, Todd. This is a nightmare in terms of making any kind of intelligent sense out of it. So Zachary, is anything available that?
Sure. So we've actually had data available for since I think
Okay.
early into the epidemic, maybe April or something. So there's sort of two primary form factors, and I think they target maybe different audiences, or maybe more than two, but two primary ones.
Mm-hmm.
One is if you go to covidcast.cmu.edu, we have a live interactive map. And so one danger with this is that we're always, there's always a concern that I think people are so inundated with, people have seen, so this kind of style, some people call it a heat map, but really it's not actually a heat map. It's something called a chloropleth, where the shade of each region corresponds to like the number associated with that region. So here what we have is like a view at the county level, but filling in some background among, pooling together the counties that don't have enough information to just give like an average over the state. And so sometimes people look at it and you're used to seeing so much data visualized in more or less this way, whether it's a state or county and MSA view, that people get a little bit inundated and just think they're all the same. But the key thing is, what is the data that you're visualizing? And so one of the things that we realized early on is like, basically everyone's looking at, for the most part, like the same two data points, right? People are looking at reported cases, confirmed cases, and people are looking at deaths. Right. There's a bunch of other things that are reported in perhaps unreliable ways or varying degrees of reliability. And so we came into it as, people with a background like, Ryan's a famous theoretical statistician, Roni's got a background also here. So we've always had, given the statistical strength of the group, obviously that they're sort of practically minded. They've been working on real flu problems since, 8 years ago. But at the same time, modeling has always been maybe at least a central, like maybe the central part of the push. And I think, one realization here looking at the COVID situation unfold is that as much as we're statisticians or ML people, we want to think that like stats or ML is like the juiciest part of the story. Sometimes like making progress on a real world problem requires a certain sort of humility to recognize that the thing that you think is the sexiest or the, whatever is maybe not what's needed right now, or maybe not the biggest choke point. And so one of the things we realized is that the actual data itself, like we needed more sensors to make sense of the situation. And so when you look at case numbers, people just sort of wind up at this impasse where you're like, okay, cases are going up, but is it because infections are going up, or is it because testing is going up? And of course you have like some people, maybe like political actors, who want to tell you, oh, it's just because of testing. And you have other people who want to say it's not because of testing at all, and it's just the situation. And then the truth is somewhere in the middle. More testing means case numbers go up. On the other hand, when case numbers triple in a short period of time, that's probably not just because of testing, right? And so other pieces of information give you another window on this, right? So like, for example, imagine if the number of cases went down. Is that because infections are going down, or is that because of a testing shortage? If you're able to see the percent positivity of the test, that can give you a little more confidence, because you see case numbers are going down and test positivity is going down commensurately. This might suggest the reason why things are going down is because the positivity rates, actually less people are positive, versus if positivity rate were going up and case numbers are going down, it might suggest that there was a case shortage and people are getting stingier with who they're testing.
But Zach, like one of the things that I think you all are doing that other people aren't doing as well is combining those data with other data sets. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what else are you looking at? How does it predict? How does it not? Like, what is some of the most predictive data sets that you're looking at that are separate from the reporting? And what are some of the ones that looked promising that turned out to be useless?
Sure. Okay, so just complete the thought first. It's just that, right? So we're looking at things like, we're leveraging our partnerships with makers of diagnostic equipment, local health providers, and then huge tech companies like Google and Facebook who are able to help us do things at a scale that we never could do with our own resources. So the sources that we have include things like test positivity, fraction of doctor's visits that are due to patients due to COVID-like symptoms, fraction of hospital visits that are due to COVID-like symptoms. Then we have these surveys, and the surveys give us another lens, among other things, give us a unique lens to ask questions about not only disease, but also like things like compliance measures, things like mask wearing, things like, and even just to get a completely independent read on levels of symptoms that doesn't go through the normal reporting chains. Like we get to ask people, are you experiencing, say, loss of sense of smell, and see, even if that's not by itself doesn't tell you how many cases are, we can track the change of that over time. Now, as far as combining those indicators, there's a number of ways that we combine. This is one thing is to, you can do something called, so we report a combined indicator that's something like a first principle component. So if you've got like some multivariate signal and you want to say, I want to distill from that a single signal that is like the signal that explains the most variance in this like higher dimensional, so I've got this group of signals that are moving over time, and I want to turn this into a single indicator that is sort of some synthesis of all of them. So that's one thing that we report on the map. So if you look on the COVIDcast map, you could see the combined indicator. But that's not the only way to combine them. Another thing that we do is we have certain indicators that intuition tells us are sort of late indicators. In general, and other indicators that we're hoping will be like early indicators will give us like a read before everybody knows, before everybody already would have known that there was a problem, things that would have been like indicate, hey, things are getting bad now before it shows up, right? Like the earlier in advance we can know and take some kind of intervention or preparation, or whether it's that we need different lockdown measures or we need to, acquire more ventilators. So one of the things that we do is we see how useful are these features in forecasting models for forecasting the conventional indicators. So for example, you could say, I want to take the survey data and use the survey data in a forecasting model whose job is to predict future deaths or future cases. And then we could look at it and say, one confirmation that the surveys we'd hope would actually be an early indicator, because people might experience symptoms before they go to the hospital, before they get tested, right? And so we'd hope that like, if an outbreak comes sort of from nothing into an area, we might see it in our survey before they would see it in the confirmed cases. And the confirmed cases tend to lag deaths by, somewhere between like 14, 20 days often. So, and often much more, but there's some, so what we do is what we call like a lagged correlation model, or like we're trying to figure out how current cases of, current survey reports, current test positivity, current, all these alternative data sources forecast future deaths or future confirmed cases. And, by showing correlations of our signals with each other, and by showing correlations of our signals with, future manifestations of like, official trailing indicators, we're able to like get more confidence. Any one indicator, one thing I'd point out that like any one indicator can be really brittle, right? Like if you just look at confirmed cases, they might spike on one day because some cases for whatever reason got like clogged in the clerical system and just showed up. You want to know, were there really more cases, or is this an artifact? And when you look at all these different signals together, you can often use, N-1 as a check on the one you're suspicious of.
So what about the article in the Washington Post about the mask wearing? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So basically, one idea, and this is work, a lot of people involved and maybe spearheaded by my colleague, Alex Reinhardt, who's a stats professor and one of our leaders in the Delphi team. One of the biggest things we have is this daily survey that runs all the time. So I'll tell you, we have this Facebook survey that, or I say our survey, but the one that Facebook directs traffic to, which is sort of we can think of this as like the slow burn, whereas the Google survey is like the fire hose. It's the Google survey at its peak got 1.2 million respondents in a single day. And so this is something that costs a lot. And so we're sort of, keep it in reserve over the summer, but we'll reactivate it in the fall, once cases get worse. The daily survey that covers sort of every county every day. In this one, we traditionally started asking people, are you experiencing certain symptoms? Like, are you experiencing loss of sense of smell? Do you know anyone in your community is? But then we started very recently, about a month ago, our plan for like the next version of the survey was to add an indicator of to add a question about compliance, like are you what fraction of time are you wearing the mask? Are people in your community wearing masks? And we're able to track now over time. Now we have a month of data on comparative mask wearing over time. And one thing that becomes very salient is that if you plot, say, a chloropleth like of current COVID cases per 100,000 people, and you plot a current chloropleth of mask wearing, self-reported mask wearing via the survey, you find that these are completely sort of complementary or inverse. And in the Washington Post article, they show something which is just the same thing, but plotted as a, not as a chloropleth, but just as a scatter plot where you could see a clear trend line of more masks, less COVID. Now, of course, when we post these things, these things are interesting for the very reason that they're fitting into, they're evidence that bears upon a causal story that we all are centrally concerned with, which is, does mask wearing
matter?
Right, exactly. And, of course, there's a fraught issue of, there's a number of confounders. Mask wearing, we believe we have a good mechanism in our heads for why mask wearing would lead to less coronavirus. On the other hand, mask wearing is probably also correlated with general compliance with government orders, including other including other mandates or other lockdown measures. So, but it's the strength of the correlation is sufficiently striking that I think for people that want to sort of say there's, not even I think there's also a question sort of from the perspective of a policymaker of burden of proof, right? Of like, given that the cost of wearing a mask is your face is scratchy for a few hours, and the cost of not wearing a mask if you're wrong is you get COVID, there's a question of, do you have sufficient cause to make, to conclude that, if nothing else, based on the current evidence, this is the right recommendation for people.
Okay, so Todd, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, there was just a question on the chat, and I think it's an interesting one. Let's see, Greg asked a question about these various COVID tracking apps. Right? And so the topic of contact tracing is pretty important. I think, if we take a step back, what are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about, the closed loop of there's a disease, the disease is caused by a virus, the virus is transmitted, we're trying to track it, so Google's spending some money on some people, and CMU is spending some money on some people, and people are investing their attention to aggregate data and predict it. But we also, when we find a positive case, the next thing we want to do is stop the transmission as close to that positive case as we can. So many people have read about these contact tracing apps, and pretty recently, Pennsylvania launched one. The first one that was launched in the world, I think, was Italy. So what happened is, back a little ways ago, China has launched an app. The app had, it's difficult to say it had no privacy protections because it was anti-privacy in its design on purpose. Like, maybe that is suitable for the Chinese market. But I think Google and Apple looked at this and said, like, okay, so no one else is going to put up with that. Like, literally no one else is going to sacrifice 100% of the information about themselves to some unknown parties with no controls. And so they put their, there was a bunch of really smart people, and they created this API that works on all Android phones that are relatively recent, all iPhones that are relatively recent. It's completely privacy protecting because the phone itself stores the contacts. The contacts are not there. It's not like it's anonymized and someone has the key. There's no way to connect your phone to you except for you. You're the only person who can do that. But your phone is out there trying to listen to other phones and just writing down the numbers. I heard this number, I heard this number, I heard this number, I heard this number. Cool. Every so often it connects up to a server and says, hey, have any of these numbers that I was close to for a while been reported infected? And if it gets a hit, it tells you, it says, hey, guess what? You had a close contact of someone who was infected and you should go get a test.
But not necessarily which one.
Right.
What's that?
But not necessarily which one.
No, it doesn't tell you anything. It's just like, hey, absolutely leads, like the friends that I've had this happen are like, who was it? And they spend the next 2 weeks trying to figure out, I was at the cafe and I stood in line. It was more than 15 minutes and there were 3 people. No, but who knows? But so the question was specifically, why is it in the US we have one per state? Like, that doesn't, so the only answer I have is because the US is not very well organized right now, and we can, we can try to do better as a people, but 1 per state is way better than none at all. And so pretty strongly encouraged. So here's how this is rolling out. Outside of the US, most nation states are doing 1 for their whole country. Okay. Inside of the US, most states are doing 1 per state. And on the server side, there is currently a contact protocol that's being implemented to do the cross-state reporting. One of the things most of us don't know, I tested positive and it turns out I never got any symptoms, so who knows, but you find out a lot about the public health infrastructure of how positive tests are reported, because I tested positive in Rhode Island and 2 hours later I had a call from a contact tracer in Allegheny County, because that actually works really well. Like, they had my address. They knew that address was part of the Allegheny County Health Department, and they're the people who called me up. And they do it. They have privacy protecting. But so I think we're all collectively going to look at trying to get that kind of contact tracing on the apps working across jurisdictions. And I hope we get that working well. But for now, I'd strongly include folks to install the COVIDcast state application. It works. It doesn't suck your battery out. You don't do anything. Right. You can every day say I feel fine or not feel fine, or you can not do that. It's up to you. But every so often, if you've been out and about and you've actually, unbeknownst to you, had a close contact with someone who did test positive, you'll get an alert.
So is Google working anywhere else with any other organizations to partner to, address the issues of COVID and this data? Or is this
sorry. So like this particular grant, that includes Zach's research group at CMU, also included, like there were a ton of resources made available for a bunch of other folks as well. So there's I can go back to the press release, but yeah, it's an international effort. Like there are obviously, we're seeing very different responses and very different data sets and the need to do different kinds of data. So there's a nonprofit research group in Africa that's teaming with the university in the US. So there's quite a few other people. It was actually like Google spending a lot of money, quite appropriately, I think, on trying to get a handle on this right now.
No, that's great. And I really appreciate both of you being here. But here's the question. Winter is coming. So what's the prognosis for us, and where should we look for the data?
Are you really you just doom and gloom? That's what you're going for here, Audrey? No,
I want to go. I want to travel, baby. I want to get out and see the world.
Do you want to give the bad news, Zach, or do you want me to? I
think the first step is maybe to say that people struggle to be in contact with the state of, say, 14-day forecasting. And this is among the very best people in the world at epidemiological forecasting. The state of 14-day forecasting of what will be, case counts on a fine geographic level or whatever it's very hard to beat straw man models. And so the case is we're the lowest. It's hard to know for sure what's going to happen in 40 days, but to say what's going to happen in 3 months is, requires some humility that there's a huge amount of uncertainty. That said, it's there are things that, we just can't rule out and need to be vigilant about, right? There's a number of unknowns that, part of the problem is that we actually have interventions, and the choice of these interventions, what we do, how we lock down, how we don't, how good we are at enforcing certain kind of measures, how good we are at deploying contact tracing and actually executing and following up. In some ways, it's a little bit easier for countries maybe at lower volumes of cases to have dedicated contact tracing workers that are order of magnitude equal to the number of people that are infected. And it's a lot harder when you have too many infected people. All these choices are going to actually influence what happens. So it's there is a possible future where we get this thing under control, I think. I'm optimistic. I think there's also a possible future where it gets a lot worse. One thing, there's a lot of things that are also unknown yet. Looking at flu forecasting, one of the key things that we do, if you look at flu forecasting, flu goes away so much during the summer that people, some of our partners who provide diagnostic equipment, we stopped getting data from them because they stopped even aggregating it for months at a time. And so there's some places where there are literally like 0 tests for weeks or months at a time during the summer. On the other hand, we have data going back 2017, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. We have really good data from the same sources for flu, where we could look at whole complete seasons, say we know what flu is like in winter and like in summer. So flu, we know there's this huge seasonal effect. And we know this for a number of other respiratory diseases. For coronavirus, and again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm a machine learning researcher who works on problems in clinical healthcare, and recently working on more the public health side in connection with coronavirus. So I'm not going to, you know, I want to be clear to not represent myself as a virologist or as, but you know, I think just at a very high level, we don't know what a full season of this looks like. We sort of caught onto it towards the end of winter, and it sort of went down and went up and it went down and went up, and we really don't know, like, are we seeing like if you know, if April, June, July, August, whatever, if that was all actually winter, would this thing have been crazy? Or is it that this thing is actually slightly less seasonally sensitive than influenza? And we can't pretend that we know the answer. And I think this is something that people struggle with in general in policy, is that everyone wants someone, like, people see like it as equivocating if you give an honest account of uncertainty. But you know, so there's a tendency, like, among politicians to represent like a false level of confidence. But the truth is that if it turns out that this thing is as seasonally sensitive as influenza, and that we are taking more or less the exact same measures we're taking now with no improvement, and cases are already increasing dramatically now, that paints a bleak picture. And we have to be real about that possibility. You could also, you know, imagine any number of other scenarios. You can imagine that this combines in the body with, you know, a number of other coronaviruses, and whatever version starts affecting people 4 months from now is less deadly. I can't rule out that possibility. I'm not the world expert on the timescales of virus evolution, and I don't know that anybody is specifically in this case. Certainly some people are greater experts than I am on those particular facets. So listen, that's the kind of situation where you could imagine getting it better under control, but you could also imagine things getting really bleak.
Listen, I'm not trying to be bleak. I was trying to extract from the amount of time that we spent together so that people could have some sense. So my takeaway is, we got some smart people that are working on a complex set of issues, and that you're trying to integrate a whole set of data so that people like Todd and myself don't have to do spreadsheets and try to deduce from that some information that is probably wrong anyway. And so my hat's off to Google for having the leadership and partnering with Carnegie Mellon and working on this stuff and being around really smart people who are not being as binary as I am right now. You know, I just want a yes or no, and I'm moving on. But that's, I don't mean to minimize the importance of your work and the complexity of it all. So I want to give my hats off to Google and to Todd for just being a great champion, for always seeing the opportunities for partnership and being a good champion of the work that's done here in Pittsburgh, and making sure that Google has a seat at the table for all those things. So I really appreciate that, Todd. And you know, it's really cool that you get an upfront view of this work as well. So that's probably even just as cool.
I think Pittsburgh is incredibly lucky to have a research institution like CMU. We have an amazing community of research institutions and universities, but CMU is clearly it's a treasure, right? Yeah. And so we're grateful for any opportunity to work together with smart people doing stuff like this.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks
for grateful for the support.
Thank you, Zach, Lipton. And if anyone wants to know any information about either of these two fellows, it's easy to find. We will put some of these resources that have been shared up next to the archive of this, and we'll stay close to this. So appreciate you tolerating some of my, you know, seeking for, you know, a binary answer, and appreciate your humor and of course your leadership. I really can't thank Google enough, as well as Carnegie Mellon and that team there, for being a part of this ecosystem. So I'm gonna say, wear a mask, be safe, and that, you know, that's my scientific advice. And pay attention to the data, participate in some of this research, and download some of this stuff that we've shared out there, and you'll get a sense of what we're working on. Yeah. I'm actually optimistic. I believe that the more information that we're gathering, and I feel very honored to know that this is going on with Google and Carnegie Mellon, it helps me as I start to extract this information and scratch my head. So be safe. Thank you, Zachary Lipton. Thank you, Todd, for everything that you do with us. Thank you, Google and CMU. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, everyone. We're back on Monday with, who's on the show Monday?
The Three Rivers Venture Fair is happening this week. So we have a nice preview of what's going on. So it should be a great show. So get your sleep. And remind everyone, tune into Tech Vibe Radio tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. on ESPN 970, because we're talking to the Pittsburgh Space Collaborative. I'm drinking my Tang tomorrow, Audrey. It's going to be fun.
Forgot about that. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Zach.
Cool. And maybe one thing I might add for people, if anybody's sort of more, so for citizens out there who are interested in accessing this data, we have the map where you could see all the signals, but we actually have many more signals that are available programmatically via our API. And I posted a link in the chat, so but that is, we expose the raw data that's used to construct the maps. So anybody who's out there who sort of knows how to access things, run a few lines of Python or R, can pull all of our signals and generate other plots that, with other signals.
So we will share everything. I've already asked Taylor to archive all the links out there. We'll put it right next to the interview. We'll share it, and really appreciate your passion. Thank you both for the work that you do and spending the time with us. So Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Great. Thanks for having us.